This is the Flint water crisis for our bioethics class. I'm Alexander Jake Moreno. I have David Lim and Spencer Nielsen. And this is our topic with how it relates to health outcomes and the environment. And we'd like to start off our presentation with this anecdote from John Snow on how history kind of repeats itself. In 1854, the British epidemiologist John Snow famously wrote, "The most terrible outbreak of cholera which ever occurred in this kingdom is probably that which took place in Broad Street, Golden Square." Snow linked the outbreak to contaminated water flowing from the Broad Street pump. He convinced city officials to remove the pump handle, ending the epidemic. Broad Street was a deeply impoverished area of London, and public officials ignored the community's pleas for help. Therefore, Dr. Snow forced the government's hand. So, just a little bit of historical background on Flint, Michigan. In April 2014, the state itself underwent emergency measures mandated by the state, and it changed its water supply from Detroit supplied Lake Huron water to the Flint River as a temporary measure. A new pipeline was to be installed 2 years later. Now, this move was intended to save money, but unfortunately, it ended up violating the EPA's Safe Drinking Water Act. Bacteria, including Escherichia coli, were detected in the distribution system, and later on, the state was attempting to disinfect the water in the distribution system, but it generated harmful byproducts, including the trihalomethanes. Unfortunately, looking at the demographic in Flint, the citizens that live there are among the poorest in America, and they just so happen to be mostly African American. And they hadn't complained that their tap water was foul and discolored. However, city, state, and federal officials just decided to turn their head. Now, how did safe water and dangerous water kind of come into play here? How did Lake Huron's water how was Lake Huron's water safe compared to that of Flint River? Well, the water that came from Detroit Water and Sewage Department was water that had a corrosion inhibitor. However, the water from the Flint River had no corrosion inhibitor. So this led to what they called a perfect storm for lead leaching into the drinking water. Flint's water infrastructure system had a high percentage of lead pipes, ranging anywhere from 10 to 80%. Now, we know that lead is a potent neurotoxin, and childhood lead poisoning has an impact on many developmental and biological processes, most notably intelligence, behavior, and overall life achievement. Now, with estimated societal costs in the billions, lead poisoning has a disproportionate impact on low-income and minority children. And when one considers the irreversible, life-altering, costly, and disparate impact of lead exposure, primary prevention is necessary to eliminate exposure. Now, looking at some political and financial impacts, there are studies that have been said that it was possible to prevent the lead seeping into the drinking water by treating the pipes with federally approved anti-corrosives for just about $100 a day. But now that the pipe system had been corroded in Flint, it would cost $1.5 billion. And since that set precedent, if that was to be replaced in the United States, it would cost $1.3 trillion.
Before the water crisis, some social determinants of health that impact and that could impact or did impact the Flint, Michigan health outcomes. Here are two of the graphs I found most compelling in doing the reading for this. On the left here, we see number of infant deaths per 1,000 live births in 2007, 2009. In red there on the far left, we've got 15.5 out of 1,000 African-American infant deaths. And that seems quite high to me. And then followed up by American Indian 8.8, Arab American 7.5, Asian American 4.2, Hispanic Latino 9.5, and white 5.6. This right graph here, high school graduation rates by race and ethnicity. Asian American 17 and 20 graduated, white 16 and 20 graduated, American Indian 13 and 20, Hispanic Latino 12 and 20, and African American 11 and 20. So conflicting reports of what's happening here. The people are describing that there are problems with the water: smell, taste, color. They're experiencing skin rashes, hair loss, exhausted all means of communicating the water problem. They've done everything they can. And they're also receiving conflicting information on the safety of the water. So that's their side of the story, the people. The government side of the story is local health officials were not allowed to speak by the state government agencies, so they're silencing them. Their claim is that the water was safe to drink. There's little transparency, there's denial of the problem, and they've determined that residents were exaggerating the problem. They're calling them complainers.
So what's going on here? And it sounds like things are not processing in the system. So what we have here is actually like a total systemic failure. We have breakdowns in legal safeguards and regulating bodies. The EPA's Safe Drinking Water Act, as it pertains to lead and copper in the water, is literally a blatant violation. And they set out having a task force in 2016. And what they found was that at every single level of government, highlighted what may amount to criminal negligence for both workers who seemingly falsified water quality results, allowing the people of Flint to continue to be exposed to water well above the federally allowed lead levels. Then now we're facing environmental injustice. All people and communities deserve equal protection of environmental and public health laws, and an equal and meaningful voice in decisions related to their natural environment. Because environmental justice is about the relationship between prejudice and environmental protection. It is intimately associated with human civil rights and legal frameworks. And of course, we look at the systemic discrimination as it pertains to racism and those individuals of lower socioeconomic status. And as we have here, at first glance, it looks like a very complicated, well, it looks like there's a lot going on here, but on the table on the left, as you can see, this is just last year, 2019 Genesee County Community Health Needs Assessment. This is what Genesee County, which so happens where it's the county where Flint is located in. You can see there's social determinants of health on the entire left side there. There's a large portion of education that's their needs that still are not being met. And you can see, as Spencer had mentioned earlier, that Genesee County students are still not graduating on time. Flint students not graduating on time. Flint students identified as homeless at any time during the year. And they looked at other social determinants such as like rates of residence with bachelor's degree, but there are a lot of income inequalities noted in this list here. And you can see on the table on the right, 1 in 5 people, 19.2, almost 1 in 5 people have depression. A little less than that. Yeah, a little less than that. You have people not having access to clean water. And as you go down, yes, you could rewind the video and revisit this. But we are facing things that, these are basic needs that people have to have met. It's basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
So with everything we've reviewed so far, the biggest thing is we know that now the world knows that Flint does have a water issue. And the question is, how did it get to this point? And one possible conclusion is due to systematic unconscious racism and its effects on Flint. Dana Bound Matthew says, this is how unconscious racism works. It automatically calls up stores of stereotypes about Black people, poor white people, single moms and their sick babies, about the unemployed, about the down and out, and then mercilessly drives decision makers to contradict their belief in equality and preference for fairness. Unconscious bias, unchecked, forces decisions informed by an unintentionally constructed view that some people's lives are less valuable, less worthy, less important than others. A nurse otherwise committed to do no harm, a governor who assures us that race played no part. These actors sincerely believe themselves free of implicit bias. And unconscious racism can explain what disregard for the health and civil right of Flint's population Governor Snyder and his officials had for Flint's population. When Governor Rick Snyder's email showed that after he was elected, he removed the local elected officials and appointed an emergency manager to cut expenses and reorganize the government in Flint. As mentioned earlier, in April 2014, the governor's emergency manager changed Flint's water source to the Flint River to save roughly $100 a day. The body of water was known to be polluted and filthy, and yet Governor Snyder discounted the criticism and complaints from Flint's residents who called the water orange-colored, lead-laden river water, and the governor said that it was perfectly good water for Flint. One can assume that in any other area with higher socioeconomic status, higher income, higher affluent population, that this would not have been something that passed and something that would have been allowed. But unconscious racism, however, is responsible for more than just poisoning the water of Flint, but it affected every aspect of where Flint's residents lived, worked, and played, and their social determinants of health. So next we'll look into the inequalities in the social determinants of health of the residents of Flint. The Flint water crisis shows the effects that disparities in wealth and socioeconomic status can have on health and quality of life. Racial segregation has led to a majority population of Flint being African Americans, further contributing to the substantial social inequality. Flint's population is predominantly Black, at least 57%. This disparity creates an ever-growing inequality in the social determinants of health for the residents of Flint as a never-ending, ongoing cycle with one disparity begetting further disparities. One of the social determinants of health is the neighborhood and the built environment. Flint's transportation, recreation, and environmental conditions are subpar at best. In addition to heavy lead poisoning in the Flint River, the lands are saturated with toxins left over from abandoned auto plants, such as arsenic, chromium, mercury, and lead solvents, while petroleum leaks into the river as well. Interstate highways bisect Flint, literally separating whites from Blacks physically and limiting transportation options for those wishing to have access to proper health care, higher educations, and healthier foods. The residents of Flint often have to either drive, if they're fortunate to have automobiles, or take public transportation farther to get healthcare or even better foods, as the options do not exist within Flint. Education. Flint's school system is still heavily segregated. Black students comprise over 90% of the population in 4 of the city's 15 public schools. And looking at the chart that Spencer reviewed before, 11 out of 20, a little over 50% have a graduation rate. So if over 90% of these schools are Black students, over 50 of them are graduating. The children having grown up in Flint drinking and bathing in the water have also been shown to have neurological and behavioral problems, further contributing to learning disabilities and disadvantages. Health and healthcare. Being born in Flint can affect one's childhood development and nutritional growth, ultimately hindering one's ability to become a healthy adult. A well-documented effect of lead poisoning on children is learning difficulties, lower IQ, slow growth, and anemia, and attention deficit disorder. The World Health Organization has deemed these to be untreatable and irreversible. So when these children who are born are drinking the water and bathing in the water and growing up, back then, nobody knew about the effects of the lead poison that can have on them. But now there is an innumerable population of children who are forever at a disadvantage physically and mentally due having been victims of the Flint water crisis. A nurse in Michigan told a mother whose child displayed elevated blood pressure levels that it's just a few IQ points, it's not the end of the world. This would not stand in almost any other area of America if a doctor or nurse or anybody told another person that it's okay that their child is a few IQ points lower because of the quality of life they have to endure. And the economic stability, the US Census estimates that in 2018, 40.4% of the population of Flint lived below the poverty line. So considering all of these inequalities in the social determinants of health, it's hard to argue that they did not play a part in Governor Snyder's decision to change the water source, in that, and as we reviewed before, is only to save $100 a day. This is a huge cost for $100 a day.
So, let's just going over what really just happened there. Literally, the city officials, the federal officials, had taken away the liberties of developing children and those that are affected by drinking the water, because now they're forever changed. They're forever damaged. And now their futures are altered, or quote unquote fate. They're not able to, the self-determination is affected because of, how they grew up. And you know what, these people don't have the means to pick up their things and move elsewhere. This is their home. This is their land. They are unable to, they are unable to make life better for themselves. So how do we go about and figuring out resolutions and reparations? How does the city of Flint achieve justice? Could you postulate that replacing and rebuilding the aged infrastructure, would that be enough? Like, replacing the pipes would cost that $1.5 billion. The city of Flint is already under a lot of financial stress. It's a post-industrial motor city, boomtown. It's already financially distressed. So can they afford this sort of thing? And if so, how does the city of Flint determine and distribute fair compensation for the wrongs caused by individual and systemic failures? I wish I had the answer to these questions. And I mean, I frankly think that nobody really does have the answers to these, because really we're facing an ugly truth here. There may be no adequate corrective justice platform to provide redress for victims of environmental injustice. Environmental injustice, as the Flint water crisis is characterized, is complex and is a byproduct of decades of social and economic deprivations. And we can talk about equality versus equity, and Spencer will follow up with that.
Spencer, you're muted.
Thank you. All right, let's try that again. One of the outcomes here is the Michigan Civil Rights Commission report, February 17, 2017. MCRC and Michigan Department of Civil Rights must listen to constituents they represent. So this is what the report outlines here, are these bullet points. They must develop deeper understanding for racialization and implicit bias, provide environmental justice to all people in Michigan, replace energy manager law, that's what David talked about, acknowledge the role of race and racism, and rebuild trust through creation of Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So that's one of the outcomes that they're hoping to prevent something like this from happening again. Let's talk about a positive outcome. The health equity in all policies. A Board of Commissioners adopted a health equity in all policies resolution, and then a tobacco 21 policy, which used the health equity in all policies framework. So they passed this new tobacco law or policy, if you will, and then recognition of the critical need of resilience in this crisis. And this cartoon outlines equality and equity. So equality is giving the same share to everyone here, but sometimes that's not adequate. If you really want to watch the baseball game, others need more help. And so that's the difference here with equity. Equity is giving enough to those in need to help them achieve a better health outcome. And so that's what they're hoping that this health equity in all policies will do. Health equity in all policies prevented the change to Flint water as a source due to perceived lower cost, inadequate water treatment, loss of trust, medical and behavioral problems. That's what it could have prevented. It could have achieved more resources allocated to the Flint water treatment plant, closer study and control of the chemicals used to treat water, and more scrutiny by state officials as to the quality of the water. One of the things we still note, though, is health is still not considered a human right in the US. Interesting to think about these things after having this class, you know, hearing about the Flint water crisis beforehand and then now revisiting it through the eyes of, you know, some of these new things I've learned about has been an eye-opener, and I've been grateful and glad to learn about some of these things, and I think it's definitely changed my view.
And that's all we have. Thank you for listening to our topic on the Flint water crisis, and we hope this was interesting and impactful for you as well. How do I stop recording?